Last time we saw the adoption of Switzerland's straight-pull 1889 rifle, which straddled the world of black powder and smokeless. Today we'll see it firmly updated into the pattern that stood on guard for the Great War. Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Swiss Gewehr 1896/1911, probably one of the most familiar rifles to US collectors today, but we'll get a closer look at it anyway. With an overall length of 51.3 inches, the Swiss haven't shortened this guy up one bit. However, we are now down to a tidy 10 pounds, so yeah, it's still pretty heavy. The detachable box magazine is more for maintenance because this rifle still loads its 6 rounds of 7.5mm, now GP11, with a cardboard charger. And before we go any further, I want to try something new on this episode. I have heard that it is best for growth to have a call to action early in the show. Now, I'm being completely transparent about this because I honestly want to reach as many people as possible with the wonderful history of these old firearms, and I know you guys do too. So the way you can help with this is to make sure you're subscribed to the show, that you like the video, that you leave a comment on the video. Whenever you do that, there's a statistical chance that it'll be shown to an additional person, and that means more people will hear the love of John Moses Browning's light, although not in this episode. Now, in addition to all that, you can support us on Subscribestar or Patreon. And you can also visit the shop over at C&Rsenal.com. Thank you all. One of the first problems we're going to find in talking about this rifle is that we're missing an intervening model. And I have almost no hope of ever finding one because nearly every single one of those would be transformed into one of these. So we're going to have to use a little imagination to see this through. That and drawings. But for now, let's reference the original 1889. When we left off last time, I was explaining that this rifle had been developed for compressed black powder, and then during the latter trials process, the French messed it all up. Now, they did this with the introduction of the Lebel 1886, and most countries soiled their collective pantaloons at the sheer screaming power of the smokeless powder-powered 8mm small bore cartridge. The gun itself was okay. Now, interestingly, the Swiss were sort of a step ahead of everyone else because they had been considering a small bore, high-speed, magazine-fed rifle with rapid charging for years. And so the French Lebel cartridge proved to be an aid to their work because smokeless powder would solve more issues than it caused, at least for them. Comparing the Swiss and French rifles, we can see the Lebel is basically a Gras with front locking lugs bolted to a Kropatschek's tubular magazine, which has to be loaded singularly, a lot like a shotgun. The Swiss design, however, used a Lee-style vertical magazine and can be loaded by cardboard chargers. Definitely a more modern consideration. Now, you may say the Swiss had an extra 4 years, but the Schmidt was largely finished in 1888, and the Lebel only went public in 1887, so maybe 1, maximum 2 years difference? If we sit here and imagine the now forgotten precursor to GP90, a 7.5mm small bore cartridge powered by compressed black powder, we put it up against the 8mm French smokeless cartridge, we'll see the former was patiently designed to have a rimless case and gently tapering proportions, perfect for reliable magazine feeding and very future-proof for eventual autoloaders. The Lebel case, by comparison, was somewhat rushed and had to work with a rifle that was quickly developed from a black powder Kropatschek. That meant an aggressive taper into an 8mm bottleneck, making it a royal pain for autoloading development down the line. Which is something we definitely saw in our RSC 1917 episode, revealing how being in a hurry to be a first adopter can leave you stuck with issues further down into the future. Replacing the compressed black powder with the new smokeless actually lowered the pressure curve and likely changed little for the locking action, if anything, on the Swiss rifle. The new powder was also cleaner burning, and this is where we see the Swiss oversight. They kept that greased paper patch when it was now unnecessary. Moreover, they had chosen to keep the locking lugs to the rearmost position possible, as far from the fouling powders as they could, and that really was critical at the time, as compressed black powder was dirty, dirty stuff. But again, the gun was never issued with black powder cartridges, so the locking lug's positioning all the way at the rear was vestigial and quickly proved troublesome. All that length means a loss of rigidity, of strength, and allows for more compression. Steel seems hard, but trust me, you put enough oomph in front of it, it'll accordion just a bit. So overpressure rounds could cause more trouble. Bore obstructions like ice or snow could cause more trouble. The 89s would more easily suffer problems with gas escape, headspace failures, and the like. This was acceptable in exchange for reliable operation with compressed black powder, but that never came true. As a matter of fact, in 1888, before the adoption of the rifle, the Swiss officials started asking Schmidt if maybe they could just go ahead and move those locking lugs up. Having been through a gauntlet of professional and personal battering in order to see his rifle, even being inspected and looking like it likely will be adopted, Schmidt was having none of it and told them all to eat it. The gun was fine. And from there it appears he sat on the issue, chasing off anyone who would dare to offer a fix. Still, that matter sat there simmering, and in November of 1892, the technical department was happy to announce that one Inspector Vogelsang had been able to produce a wooden model with the necessary changes to the locking lugs. From there, 3 prototype rifles were produced, and when they worked out, 50 more. These would be delivered for testing in January of 1895, and I'm curious to note that Schmidt had left his directorship in 1894. By his own admission, this was from the constant fighting, and I am curious if the lug issue was part of that matter. Anyway, across all the testing, the new lug position was superior. They were stronger, more rigid, reduced instances of cracking, could handle cartridges in excess of 2,600 atmosphere. The receiver could be lightened by 100 grams. The actions were smoother due to lower surface areas in play, and the action length could be reduced some 2 centimeters, which was transferred into the stock length of pull, allowing for better posture when shooting. The test rifles used almost entirely off-the-shelf 1889 parts, except they did require the receiver and much of the bolt components to be new made. Since it was such a clear improvement, the new lug position resulted in a July 1896 adoption of a new model of Schmidt rifle. Now, production of the 1889 was simply switched over as new components were spun up and the old ones used up. There appears to have, however, been a hard stop and a hard start date where they went, okay, we're good, stop. Go. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find that exact date. Now, from a glance, you would never spot the difference between an 1889 and an 1896 unless you knew what to look for. Now, you're going to want to focus on that pretty small difference in receiver length, or you're going to have to remove that bolt from the action and get a good look at it. It appears 137,050 1896 rifles would be produced at Waffenfabrik Bern through 1912, and that cutoff date is quite the key for why I don't have one here today. The guns are all but extinct. However, our friend and episode consultant, Bloke on the Range, did manage to turn one up if you're supremely curious. So give him a watch after this, or pause and come back. I'm fine either way. Before we talk about the fate of the 96, however, I'll need to quickly hit a few other rare models, which will later coalesce and to make sense when we talk about our Model 1911 today. First up is the unassuming Cadet rifle. Developed just after the 1896, this uses the forward locking lug arrangement. Well, middle locking lug arrangement. The gun was designed for youth and training and was fitted with a shortened 23-inch barrel. As you can see, there is no provision for a magazine, making this a single-shot rifle. The rear sight was appropriately marked for the GP90 cartridge, but only on the left side. The right was marked for a reduced power training cartridge. Now, normally in this show, we don't cover something like training rifles because they're really just simplified offshoots of the Marshall rifles. They fall into that sort of ROTC gray area of customized research that tends to bog down a show like this one. But in this case, the Cadet rifle would prove to be a unique part of the development process because its short, handy barrel length would finally prove out something that had been plaguing particularly the cavalry, but also other departments. Recall from last episode that the Swiss cavalry had been forced to use an Austrian Mannlicher-derived straight-pull Model 1893, a carbine made necessary by the old 1889's poor performance when it was shortened up. While seemingly an easy choice with its straight pull action, compact receiver, same clip loading and excellent balance, the 1893 really should have made the Schmidt look bad, honestly, but it was loathed for one simple reason: complexity. Recall from our Mannlicher episodes, this was a nightmare to disassemble and reassemble, and the sort of repairs you could make at an armorer level with the Schmidt had to go all the way back to the arsenal on the Mannlicher. It was honestly just too fiddly to keep up with its contemporary. Other complaints centered on the stiffness of the action by comparison between the two guns, and in reality these were somewhat more minor. So when the Fortress artillery boys wanted a carbine, no one was eager to create more Mannlichers. This issue had been brought up back in 1892, however it was kicked down the road by arguing over training and that sort of thing. By 1896, however, the Fortress artillery were showing that they could afford the range time and that the officers were clamoring for a shortened rifle for their men. When they did get to work exploring this issue, they happily found almost everything that they would need was already in production, just scattered in odd places. We'll just take that Cadet rifle and slap a magazine on there. Okay, that's a little big. Let's take the one off the Mannlicher. It's detachable anyway. Close enough. So take that and some minor changes and fine-tuning, and we get the artillery short rifle model of 1900, named for its February adoption of you will never guess which year. Its use was spread not only from Fortress troops, but to telegraph balloonists and cyclists. Which works out because it was initially paired with a model 1892 cruciform bayonet that had originally been developed for the 89 long rifle to be used by said cyclists. Later in 1906, a sawback bayonet would be developed for the telegraph men and pioneers. Overall, only 18,750 of these shortened rifles would be produced, making them a rare enough sight, if not for the fact that, like the long rifle 1896, they too will be consumed by the end of this episode. Now, the Cavalry were not going to be the only ones traipsing around with the Mannlicher. They too wanted to move onto the Schmidt platform, and so with some additional changes to the model 1900, they would wind up with their own carbine in 1905. Instead of the 23-inch barrel, the new carbine scooched on down to 21.7 inches, which was stocked all the way up to the nose cap. In turn, this was fitted with some front sight protectors like the old 1893. Most importantly to our story today, it was also fitted with a semi-pistol grip stock and inletted for side slings. There was no provision for a bayonet. A mere 7,900 of these would be assembled before the Swiss decided to mix things up yet again. Once more, however, nearly all of that already small number would be consumed by the unstoppable monster that I'm oh so close to naming in this episode. And we're finally in a position to start addressing the 10-pound rifle in the room, because part of the reason the model 1905 was so short-lived is because it was introduced after a certain vein of investigation had begun in the Swiss rifle shooting circles. You see, there were two problems starting to arise with the otherwise excellent model 1896 long rifle. One, it was fairly heavy, and two, the GP90 cartridge was getting long in the tooth. What had once been a marvel of flat shooting was starting to fall behind yet again. In 1898, the French had introduced Ball D with its pointed or Spitzer bullet. Once more, they had flattened the curve of their ammunition. Recall, the flatter your bullet trajectory, the more forgiving your point of aim, and the longer your point blank range. That's the distance in which you'll score a fatal hit on something you're pointing at. Germany would follow with their own S-Patron in 1903, and the US, well, 30-06 in 1906. So in December of 1907, Switzerland began a series of trials. Now, without going into too much detail, these included a variety of barrel and rifling configurations and several bullet and powder changes. These would all be compared to and trialed to whether or not to be compatible with the original barrels and ammunition. Basically, it's a big mix and match to see what's going to work best and if any of it can be retroactive. The final 1907 experimental cartridge was extremely successful and required almost no adjustment in order to be adopted later in 1911. GP11 was a screaming fast, laser-straight, Spitzer bulleted cartridge, one that made full use of the strength of the 1896 action and threatened the old 1889. Now, just to be clear, GP11 will fit and fire from an old 1889 rifle, and you'll probably even be fine afterwards, maybe even if the gun isn't. Militarily, GP11 was only to be used in 89s in case of extreme necessity, so this falls under that old Italian Vetterli heading, because feeding an 89 GP11 is going to inevitably lead to a failure, and you're signing up for a game of what we're going to call Swiss roulette. Honestly, it's not worth using in the guns anyway though, because the trials showed that using the existing 89 barrel for the new Spitzer cartridge was a complete mess thanks to that long, odd throat, which was made necessary again by the healed bullet and paper patch GP90. Well, the 89 barrel left too much slop to be of much use for that GP11, which doesn't tend to shoot precisely from those old guns even when it doesn't pop them. This represented a further problem for the Swiss authorities because while the Model 1896 Action could handle the new cartridge, obviously their barrels would not, and they were looking to save as much money in this process as possible. Now, before we go too far down that line, let's talk about issue number 1. Swiss marksmen were also interested in getting the weight down, and that's a fair concern because this was a long, heavy rifle. Now, the obvious answer here is a universal short rifle, something that was already being taken up at this time by both the United States and over in Great Britain. These had proven to be more than adequate at reasonable wartime shooting distances, especially with technology like artillery starting to take a more principal role at longer ranges. But here's the rub. When you have a nation of competitive marksmen, they start to get fixed on precision, on having the longest possible range and the highest possible muzzle velocity. They get locked on having a full-length barrel, and no matter how sensible a short rifle might be, they're not going to give up their chance at having an even better best score just so the army can do something sensible. I mean, these two guns, they can only have sights marked up to 1,500 meters, whereas the 1896 and 89 were marked up to 2,000. So of course that means you could just hit 2,000 meters away on iron sights, right? Honestly, a lot of the defense of this needing to shoot beyond 1,500 meters thing was, well, we have to fight in the mountains, so you might use that. You guys aren't going to see it at that range, but okay. Either way, the long rifle was staying, so the weight would have to come off some other way. Well, they did find that in using 6-round carbine magazines, they really weren't seeing any difference between the overall reloading time between loading 2 6-round chargers and firing 12 rounds versus loading 1 6-round charger and firing 6 rounds twice. So that 6-round magazine could be put on the next long rifle to save weight. Oh, but they did want to steal that semi-pistol grip while we're at it from the cavalry gun, so pull that over. All right, so you get weight off in one place and then you just stick it on somewhere else, of course. Yeah, in the end, for the trials, they just drilled some holes here and there, basically wherever they could to try to get some of the metal weight off the gun. These would not be incorporated into the final design, however, which is why this thing continues to weigh 10 dang pounds, but getting a little ahead of myself. In 1909, 900 long rifles, 100 short rifles, and 100 carbines were put into trials. I'm unsure of their exact configuration, but it appears 2 of the 3 were adopted with almost no changes whatsoever. 1, however, was left behind, but first let's talk about the long rifle. Ultimately, it would be adopted in 1911. Gotta move at government speed, folks. While the trials guns had been scratch-made, the plan was to convert the existing 1896 rifles into a new pattern, and that's exactly what I have here. So let's take a closer look. You know, if we start at the front of this, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was an 89. The only big tell is the fact that our former barleycorn triangle sight is actually now a blade. By the way, talking about that floated barrel, boy, look at how much room there is in there. All right, so let me walk her on down. Middle band looks the same, everything looks the same until we get to this rear sight. Now, we're on a tangent rear leaf sight, a lot like a Mauser Kar98K, let's say. In this case, we're still going up to 2,000 meters. We still have a zero of 300 meters, but we now have a rear U-notch. And again, it's just that single button adjust, and there's no way to slap this one back down. You actually got to ride her back, so don't go bending your rear sights or breaking your hands, folks. If I bring her on back, we're gonna have what looks to be the same action, and this one has a slightly more modern plastic replaced pull. This would have originally been the same old vulcanized rubber style that they had on the 89. Now, even though it looks like the same action, the real magic, the real change is on the inside. So let's go ahead and open this guy up. Oop. Helps to be able to actually pull her open. There we go. Man, these things are so easy to use when you're holding them in your shoulder and so hard to use when they're sitting on a table 3 feet away from you. So I'm gonna set this gun aside. And just as a reminder, let me go get that 1889 bolt, because here's the original and here's the replacement. I mean, it's kind of a hard tell, right? Let me see if I can square these up enough that you can really see it. Now, first and foremost, obviously, our locking lugs have moved. They've gone from all the way back there to all the way up here. That's great. If I really get the bolts aligned, there's no difference in the bolt body, none of that, but check this out. Look at back here. Look at all them centimeters we got. That's a fair improvement in action length just from getting these guys floated up in here. And I don't even think they tweaked the camming surface. I think they managed to fit it so that you have the same pull. That's beautiful. I mean, that's a lot of space saved, probably more than the actual width of the lugs. Honestly, great. You also see the same for the op rod, which is the same overall length, but is now scooted further forward significantly in order to complete its push, so that the locking surface, or rather not the locking surface, but rather that point at which the op rod locks into the internal bolt body is in the same spot relative to the front of everything. But see how much further our rod's coming, because they've actually extended our rods that when this draws back, you get some more stability that still rides in the receiver. Because if you think about that, shorter length means you have to extend this to keep your receiver balanced out, or else this is going to come out of the back of the receiver and then it's going to bang up the rear if it goes in a little bit crooked. There's no real need to tear this apart because it comes apart the exact same way as last episode. Absolutely great little system. And if you're a Swiss soldier, no change from your perspective. I mean, whether these are here or here, it doesn't matter to you. Unless you compare them side by side, you're going to go about your same business. I guess except if you go to reassemble this and you just confusingly put these to the rear, you're going to get confused and you're going to have to flip it back around to get it to work. But that's really about it. That is terrific. If we turn to the guns themselves, we can also see some other things that line up. So on this guy, we now have a new magazine, and I can actually detach that for easy cleaning and maintenance, not for quick loading. But we have a double stack 6-round magazine that comes right out of the action. Cool, nice and compact, fairly simple. And then if I flip this guy over, we're gonna see that as a converted rifle, this has a weird feature, which you notice there's some asymmetry here that is really unnecessary. There's just, you need some for the notch for holding that magazine, but then look at all this. Like, what is going on here? Well, that's because this used to be an 1889, so all this real estate would have been that magazine disconnect lever, and now you have to eat up that space in the wood and this odd bulge with just extra metal in order to convert what would have been an 1896 rifle, which still had the same magazine system as the 1889, into this. So remember, we're covering 2 rifles as we jump. Now, specifically again, to being a 1911 and not an 1896, we now have the semi-pistol grip. So as an 1896, yes, it would have had the locking lugs, yes, it would have had some of the other features, wouldn't have had this. And this is a big improvement. Now in this case, it's just been inletted and fitted into the stock very rigidly. I don't think I've ever heard of one of these tearing out, so good job, guys. But this is a marked improvement in terms of handling the rifle. I find it lovely. There's a final change on these guns that has to do again with the magazine, but it's more to do with charging it. So let me get that in. If I get this where you can see it in the forward camera, we have our usual large port, right? I mean, look at that guy. Our big old port right to the top. And again, like the old gun, this would have been loaded from a cardboard charger. However, they included an extra option specifically with the 11 series, and you may be able to see it here if you look closely. There are notches right here. And a lot of people don't notice these. That's for a stripper clip. The entire 11 series was built in order to use either the original cardboard chargers or, if they decided to, a stripper clip, a massively wide stripper clip that I do not have, as they are extremely rare and were only used in the trials process and never realized in the Swiss Army. Bloke on the Range has a video on those. I highly recommend you check it out because he managed to get his hands on the originals, and he talks about why he thinks that they were trialed and why he thinks that they were ultimately dropped. Please do go watch that after this episode. And I just want to snug this in here to drive this point home. I'm going to align, and I know my patented plastic pokey's a little stiff. If I align those guys, you'll see, as close as I'm going to get, you'll see, again, slight difference in the receiver. The new 11, which is actually, this is coming from the 96, it's not just indicative of the 11. We have our hole here, we have our hole here on the 89, and then there's that slight difference in length between these two receivers. Very hard to pick out in photos unless you're paying very close attention. It's actually easier to read on the bolt than it is on the outside of the receiver. All right, new rifle, new cartridge, but I don't think there's enough difference in the action to deserve its own animation. So let's send this straight off to the range. Yeah, these are honestly pretty cool, but we've got a lot of ground to cover, so don't leave me just yet. Now, you can all see why the 1896 is all but extinct. Almost 100% of them were converted into the new 1911 pattern, making model 9611s common as all get out today. Whereas, if you find an original 96, it's likely that it was commercially purchased, not by the Army. Complete conversion of the 96s would not cover the expanding Swiss Army as a whole. And again, since the old 1889 model couldn't take the pressure, it avoided the conversion process and was never updated for GP11. So that means you now need to have new-made Model 11 rifles produced. And it's worth noting that they were slightly different from the 9611. At a glance, the G11 has an integrated pistol grip instead of the one dovetailed one like on the 9611, and the pure 11 has a longer butt with a flatter plate. But that's no proof, because a 9611 suffering a broken stock was likely to be shoved into a new-made 1911 pattern. Most books will tell you that the true way to ID your gun is through the serial number here on the receiver. And while that is actually true, I have a somewhat simpler method, alright? If you were to go ahead and pull the mag out, open the bolt, and just look inside, you may find something. Where the receiver meets the wood line, you should see, or not see, a little linear dimple. If that tract is present in your gun, well, it was from the 96 pattern, as this was the space provided to fit the older magazines with their center seam. The new-made receivers did not need this cut, thanks to the flush-fitting 1911 magazines. Both the 9611 and Pure 11 used the same barrel production, so I'm unsure how many of which were affected when I tell you that the first 20,000 or so barrels were not great. You see, they had trialed both 230mm and 270mm twist rates, and for some reason had decided on 230mm only to find that it did not perform as well in the final product, so they ran on back to 270. Of course, our 1911 also received a bayonet, though in this case it held on to a design originally introduced for the 1896 rifle, which was the model 1899 bayonet, which was really just the old 1889 bayonet with an additionally raised pinch in the lower fuller that helped it stay in its scabbard. In 1918, it would be bulked up by other 89s, again fitted with a rivet to accomplish the same. The initial shortfall of 9611s was predicted to be 60,000 rifles, but over the years more and more would be needed. World War I in particular would see a massive mobilization of the Swiss armed forces and further drive up the need for rifles, so much so that by 1919 production was ended with plenty of reserve guns, which would certainly last through the replacement, which appears in the early 1930s, although that is beyond our scope today. In the end, some 126,700 Gewehre 1911 long rifles would be produced from scratch, making them roughly as common as the converted guns. Now that could be the end of our story today, except the adoption of the 1911 rifle also integrated the adoption of a singular short rifle, like this one. This is the Carabiner 11, a handier Schmidt, but not so Rubin. With an overall length of 43.4 inches, we're getting pretty dandy. Now the weight is down to just 8.6 pounds, also convenient. Magazine capacity is again 6 cartridges, that being the 75x55 GP11. Now remember, when they trialed what would become the GP11 cartridge and the paired rifles, they included both 100 short rifles, which, well, obviously they were adopted in some form, and 100 carbines. Thanks to those earlier tests, the Swiss now favored the 592mm barrel as the shortest possible for that GP11 cartridge. Anything below that, you're going to have excessive muzzle flash and noise. And so these two guns, a Kurzgewehr and a Carabiner, the only real major difference between them, well, it's the front sights, sling positions, and whether or not they would be issued with a bayonet. Well, if you're going to produce the same action and same barrel and same sights, you could just merge the two patterns. And, well, what you get is what's in front of you right here. So let's make a little bit of room. Get a closer look. Let's start with the action, because it's identical. It's the same bolt, same magazine, trigger, everything. Although, in this case, this gun was made originally as an 11, so therefore it does not have as weird of an assembly. There's just a little bulge for where this guy goes in. Also, because this is the first time we've seen a pure 11, let me get that buttstock in shot for you. It's much squarer than the original. As a matter of fact, let me get that good old G11, and you can see much rounder, much thicker, flatter, thinner, and really not a big enough difference for the Swiss Army to care whether you got this or this, but this is the 11 for sure. This is a holdover from the 96 and the 89. So, new specifically to the carbine, if we walk forward, we're gonna see that our handguard comes a little bit further back, protects over the chamber area, and we have a shorter, still tangent rear sight. This only goes up to 1,500 meters, and then back on down to, I believe, still a 300 meter zero. So it really still favored distance even on these carbines. If I get on to the front, we have the full stock, no surprise there, all the way up to just beyond the muzzle. And again, we have that floated system. There's a little bit of, I don't know if you can hear that, there's a little bit of play there. That's good. We have same old rod. The big difference is on this guy, we have the front sight protectors. That means that what they're hiding down in there is it's another dovetailed sight, but it's actually set front to rear at a cross angle. So since it's set at this angle here, if you want to move it left to right, you have to move it front to back, and then it just walks in that cam track either way, which is a nice solution to avoid having to chase something back and forth inside of this protected area. Honestly, I don't think they get enough credit for how smart of even just this little idea is. These are very carefully chosen things on this gun. This is a very well thought out gun. But if I move her on back to the rear, that's really it. I mean, there's nothing else fancy about this other than the fact that it's short. And the shortness counts for a lot though. It makes it much handier to use. Now, actual adoption lagged behind the long rifles, so despite being the Karabiner 11, this became official in January of 1913. That does, however, mean we can now go shoot it. You know, you can definitely see why this became the only short rifle. I don't know if I want to go much shorter on that barrel, but you can especially see why they kept that heavy long rifle. I mean, there's just no way you could run an army on just 1,500 mere meters of aimed fire. Just like with the 1896 rifle, previous guns, the short rifle 1900 and carbine 1905, were converted to the new 1911 pattern. Every single one they could lay hands on, making the originals extremely rare. Again, you should be able to tell the difference between the new made and converted by checking in on that receiver groove. However, I have not confirmed that by an actual extant example, so maybe double check those serial numbers. Anyway, we always list books in the comments, so go check in your local library. Our best numbers say 26,649 converted guns and 184,250 new-made K11s. So closing in on nearly half as many as the long rifles. The reason for so many is likely because of the expansion of specialty roles in that Great War period, which saw more and more non-frontline infantry-styled troops. Both carbines and rifles started to be issued to new recruits in 1913. However, large numbers of 1896 rifles along with the two shortened models had to be recalled in order to be converted. So like we mentioned last episode, during 1912, the Landwehr would temporarily be rearmed with the older 1889 rifles. These could run the GP90 ammo that was already on hand and provided enough of a buffer to start sort of cycling the 1896s through that 1911 program. Once enough guns were completed, the Landwehr II was updated. Curiously, the 1896 had not had enough time to make it to the Landsturm, so they were largely unaffected by this changeover entirely. While the K11 could accept all previous Schmidt bayonets, depending on the type of troops to which it was going to be issued, it would also see an upgraded Pioneer pattern in 1914 and a unique two-edged dagger in 1918. Alright, so the Swiss have a lot of cool rifles, but how did they perform? As the guns themselves only really took on a shorter magazine and pistol grip from the perspective of the shooter, the GP11 Spitzer cartridge was the big key improvement, and it's the thing that stuck out the most. This was likely a great comfort during the outbreak of World War I, in which Switzerland never fought. However, they weren't some distant observer. They were the southern Belgium, a neutral nation who bordered both Germany and France. That is not a great position to be in 1914-1915. Now, geographically, they had some advantage. Neither power saw the Swiss front as one they wanted to particularly open up. Swiss neutrality also provided some political and military benefit to everyone, besides being a common communications go-between. It's worth noting that they accepted some 68,000 sick and wounded soldiers from all sides, saving lives all the way around. So they definitely had some guarantees outside of their armament, and yet that armament was a pretty good insurance policy when you think about it. During the more fluid early stages, they had 3 whole divisions stationed in a region known as Kilometer Zero, a roughly 1 kilometer stretch of their border that served as the southern base of the entire Western Front. Raising both their rifles and massive Swiss flags helped to keep the warring nations from accidentally kicking the anthill, and that's a fairly big hill. Relatively. Switzerland's universal conscription meant that they could put 250,000 frontline troops into service right away, with another 200,000 auxiliaries. Any invasion would also be met with regional defense units, so not what you would call an easy target. As a matter of fact, Swiss armed neutrality in World War I has pushed what may be, honestly, an apocryphal story, but one that is, well, repeated very often and honestly quite funny. Supposedly during a 1912 visit to Switzerland, Kaiser Wilhelm II had been observing the Swiss military reforms with interest, and somewhat rudely queried, what would the 250,000 Swiss troops do if Germany invaded with 500,000 troops, something that they could do very easily? Basically, nice job, but we're bigger than you, and we can commit double your army while, kind of breaking a sweat, not even breaking a sweat. Again, this was supposedly said to Swiss President Forer, and stories vary as to whether it was he or his stray militiamen who responded, well, we would shoot twice. Given the Swiss views on marksmanship and the excellent Gewehre 1911 rifle and Karabiner 1911, that's a pretty strong threat. Thankfully, Switzerland never had to make good on it, and after the front line stabilized and entrenched, they managed to walk down their martial forces into something more of a standby rather than fully mobilized. Now, this would be the closest either of, well, this gun or this gun came to actually being in a war. And for the most part, the 1911 long rifle was something of 1 foot in the past and 1 in the future, but the K11 specifically, ultimately paving the way for that aforementioned 1930s adoption of a truly universal short rifle. But again, not our story today. That's in the distant future from 1918. I'm sure you guys could probably go hound Bloke on the range into wrapping up his straight pull series though, if you'd really like to see some more on these guns before we get a chance to get there. Special thanks once again to him for being my research buddy and making sure I kept it in the lane. If you like these sorts of rifles and others, I'd seriously go check him out. Before that, however, we have to take a visit from Mae and hear her opinion on both the 1911s. Alright guys, we're back with Mae, and we're back with another Swiss straight pull, so this is deja vu.
More of my stuff.
And that is a very similar gun to this one.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty...
Same action, I thought about my knee higher.
Yeah, good job.
Same action, same length.
Pretty much, yeah. It's over there.
7.5 smokeless cartridge.
Yeah, we have changed. We have changed up, which is good.
No, that's the same. 7.5 smokeless.
Oh, okay.
But Spitzer bullet.
That's what I'm thinking.
Higher velocity, flatter shooting. Now, I want to make this very clear before we go any further, just because there's always confusion on this point. The 89, we called it a black powder rifle.
Right.
It was always smokeless. The 89 from its adoption was a smokeless powder rifle in service. The problem is, right up until its adoption, it was being trialed as a compressed black powder small bore rifle.
Right.
So it was very high tech, but still black powder, which is why you saw... those locking lugs all the way at the rear here, so far away from the bolt.
That is massive.
And the reason for that was to avoid the black powder fouling, because compressed black powder is dirty stuff. And they were sacrificing a lot of efficiency in order to get, a lot of efficiency in metal to get efficiency in ballistics. And then smokeless powder comes out, solves all the problems for them, but then there's not really time to readapt all this.
No, that would take it too much time, I agree.
Or it becomes to them they don't necessarily know how clean smokeless powder is going to be.
So if anything, it's just an extra little precaution.
Right, this feels, in their point of view, it's over-engineering. It's completely unnecessary engineering. And you see it go away when we move to this gun. So, in trying to avoid that problem, or not avoid that problem, but trying to get away from a problem they didn't have, they made that mess. They cleaned it up on this one. What are we seeing for differences, Mae? Walk us through, from your perspective, what's changed.
So, some of the obvious changes, since you were just talking about locking lugs, they have been moved from the rear to the
Middle?
front? It's like front, middle. It's like technically the middle range, but it's like more towards the front.
Yeah, so front locking in this case is not at the front of the breech face.
Right.
It's still as far away as it would be on a Lee Enfield. But it's still a lot closer than it was on the other one.
Yeah, there is that. So at least we transitioned. There is that. Magazine. So I don't have as many rounds now, which, sad. Of course, don't have as many. But hey, it is a much lighter gun as a result.
Yep.
And then on top of that, this one actually does hold back the bolt from the follower. So there is that.
It locks open on empty, which
Yeah.
is critical when you're under fire and you have an action as slick as this.
And I could see you going through the motions of this one and accidentally, after some time or fatigue, just dry firing this one without even thinking about it. And then thankfully, semi-pistol grip. Man, that made a difference on a range day for me this time around.
Would you say that is the biggest difference ergonomically?
I mean, for me it was. For me, using the gun on range, shooting it, felt like the biggest difference.
When we filmed, it was 95 degrees, 95% humidity practically. I mean, we had just been in between 2 rainstorms on a 95-degree day.
Yeah.
You were covered in sweat.
And it just would not stop.
Yeah.
It just kept coming.
Yeah.
And then as a result, I was slipping and sliding everywhere. So.
And we can see it. You can see in the footage. You have a much easier time controlling this gun. Almost the same weight, almost the same length. Well, same length. Very, very one-to-one in terms between this and the 89, with the difference being that semi-pistol grip. Semi-pistol grip made a key difference, I think.
Yeah. I agree. And then the only other, physical difference, I want to say, between them was the sight. So we've gone from the quadrant sights to these tangent sights, and then I'm not a big fan of the setup for how they have the rear sight with the front sight, because you've got a U-notch in the rear now with a blade front sight. And
hold on, that's coming away from a V-notch rear and then an inverted V, barleycorn, whatever you want to call it, triangular front sight.
If I had to pick between the two, I prefer that V with barleycorn as opposed to the U with the... No, not for you? I mean,
blade sights are so much more... If we're going for a precision read, which again, those are fine sights, these are fine sights. We're in that same area of being marksman, If I'm going with a fine sight, I prefer blade, and I'll take...
Well, I prefer blade too, but it's different rear sight setup.
Well, you want a blade with a square rear, right?
Yes, but I get it.
Square rear is going to gunk and have problems on a military setting.
I know.
U is easier to cut. It's straightforward. It's fine. You're picky.
I'm just picky. I'm just saying it's not the perfect setup. It's fantastic.
Despite the change in the lugs, cycling should be the same except for that hold open on the last round.
Yep.
And then your trigger should be the same.
It should be the same. That's right. I almost did slip my mind on this one. I love the trigger on this one, but unfortunately, it's not supposed to be what it is. It feels like a single stage, but that's clearly because someone's gone in there and polished it up.
We've had this once before where we had, I think it was the Swede.
I think so.
That had essentially a DQ. It had walked out on the sear and caused it to be a single stage only because it was braking before when it should have. This gun is not that. This gun is braking at the right time, but someone has gone in and altered the sear arrangement so that it doesn't have the first hump.
Yeah.
So it's a continuous single stage pull. So it's actually set up correctly. There's no need to fix it. However, it's not how it would have been for military use at the time, and Mae loves it, of course.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do love it. The only other big difference, though, I want to make sure I did mention it this time around because we almost didn't before, recoil.
Ooh.
Recoil on this one was pretty up there. So I went from the 89 to immediately shooting this one, and I instantly thought, wow, I love that trigger. God, that's a lot of recoil.
Right.
Now, granted, I really think that's because I went from the 89 to this one that it felt like that. Immediately. I felt like that big of a difference between the two, but realistically, as the day went on, as I was switching in and out between all 3 guns, essentially, it didn't start to feel that abnormal. It started to feel more just what it probably should be, so it started to feel more in a reasonable range, I guess, as time went on.
And then the interesting thing, we'll talk about this in a second, but that still has the same butt plate as the 89 and 96 rifles. When we get to the carbine, you'll see a flatter-ish butt plate with some different arrangement in order to adapt for GP90. So this is not even the most optimized version because this is the conversion. This is the 9611. And the proper 11 would have been flattened out a little bit more.
Okay.
And we don't have one of those. But we have the carbine, so
I guess I have another thing I have to acquire.
Oh, God. So that is true. But again, Mae owns all the Swiss rifles in this
so this is
series.
mine.
Yeah.
It looks so nice.
Yeah, that one has a whole...
I got a good example.
Now, does this dramatically change your opinion of having a Schmidt in the Great War? Because now you have this flatter shooting GP11 cartridge, you have the new sights, you have the semi-pistol grip, you have smaller magazine, and otherwise not a lot of differences for you between that and the 89. Are those little things enough to take this off that where we were on the 89 and we're going, I guess technically we would be okay with using it in the Great War, but it's not making us feel very good, right? Does that move this a little bit up, a lot up? Like, where is it putting us?
Yeah, I love his descriptions there of, where is it in that range? So yeah, this actually does shoot up to one of the better long rifles of the war that we've handled. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still wish it was a little bit shorter and the balance was a little bit better, but I mean, we're probably going to get to that in a moment just on some change-ups there.
For me, here's where it goes. If we look at this design, I still consider it to be mechanically inefficient. I still consider that it's probably very expensive to produce compared to some other guns, but it works. From the shooter's perspective, from someone in a trench, it works. You pull bolt. Let's say you go up against the Germans. Okay. Actually, let's say you go up against the French. They have either the Lebel or the Berthier. Yeah. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, that's going to be an improvement right there.
But the Germans, they have the Gewehr 98 long rifle. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's starting to become more of a competitor than the winner outright.
I think I would probably prefer this over a Gewehr 98.
I mean, to be fair, it is pretty good. It is pretty good. It's pretty smooth and it's straight pull. Like, honestly, I thought it was rapid from the shoulder for firing. The
action's a little overkill. It's a little heavy, but the sights read fast and easy.
They do.
Compared to the Gewehr 98. They could be better. Like, the French really got around to making some cool battle sights. But these are still good sights.
You say French,
yeah, they did because they had those blocky sights, and these are
true.
These aren't going to be great night sights. You know what I mean? These are very fine sights, but they're confidence inspiring. I would take this over Gewehr 98. I think it's
even with that 300 for the lowest setting on that.
300 meters. That's the hard rub actually. But the Germans had the same thing. They had low of 400 meters.
I guess that's true.
I think. They adjusted the sights further up. So you're going to be aiming low all the time anyway.
That's fair.
But yeah, I feel pretty confident about this guy actually.
It was a pretty good shoot.
Which is interesting. It tells you how few changes you have to make. Because what happens is when you move those lugs up just that little bit, now all of a sudden you don't have these issues. Like the Swiss loaded up with a much hotter cartridge. Much hotter. Flatter shooting cartridge. And they're not having any of those gas problems that they were having before.
Nope.
That's a big difference, and especially means something to a soldier that's got to fire 1,000 rounds while he's in a battle, you know?
Oh, yeah. It makes a huge difference.
And then quick loading. I could probably load this as
single
fast
charger load now.
Yeah, those cardboard chargers, I could load them faster than I could load the Gewehr 98.
Yeah.
6 rounds, so I'm 1 over.
Oh, that's already a plus there.
The manipulation from the shoulder from a good shooting position, you're not going to be contorting your arm. So if I'm laid down somewhere, I don't have to do all this stuff to get...
Oh, yeah, no, you're just in and out.
Yeah. No, it's strange, but, the 89 was borderline not safe feeling for World War I. This would actually have done very well in World War I bet.
It would have done fine.
But it was never there, so we don't know. Now, what was your big complaint on this? What was the number one complaint on this gun?
What, the sights just being at 300?
No. The gun as a whole, not between this and the other one.
I don't remember what else. What are you talking about? The length?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh, my God.
You're so nuanced. You're forgetting what...
so dense right now. Yes,
Here, watch this. Okay. What's your number one complaint on that gun?
Length and weight.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, have I got a solution for you?
So dense today.
What if I told you could have a straight pull?
Okay.
That was shorter and lighter. That had a semi-pistol grip.
So are you trying to take me for a ride right now?
Hey! Oh, look at that.
Look at this little short rifle. It's so cute.
What's going on?
I mean, there's not as much going on. I made it funny. Anyway, so this is why I'm barely allowed on camera. All right, so some of the more obvious changes. Obviously shorter, obviously lighter, obviously balance. It's a lot more weighted to the rear now because we've lost a lot of weight up front. So, I mean, I've mentioned it before, I prefer that, especially for this straight pull. Oh. Yeah, it nests so well in the shoulder.
Weight between the arms is good.
Oh yeah, fantastic. We've gone back to the normal trigger for like the 89.
I'm sorry that this isn't the one with the polished two. This has the correct two-stage trigger.
I missed that modified trigger. But yeah, still got a lot of other stuff is the same, except I think the sights are different.
Well, it's a tangent rear leaf.
Yeah.
Just as before. However, much to your disappointment, I know this is really going to change your opinion of the gun.
Okay.
Mine is sighted to 2,000 meters. And yours only goes up to like 1,500.
It does only go up to 1,500.
So, you've lost your ability to accurately shoot people at over 1,500 yards.
Dang it.
With iron sights, which you were clearly doing.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
In the battle.
Mm-hmm. Well, neutral.
They're going to shoot from well beyond their borders.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Let's be honest. The reason that the 2000 stuck around for so long, the reason that you couldn't get to a short rifle, we covered this. They were a country of marksmen, and again, anything that could possibly drive down their score from year to year was rejected.
Yeah.
Realistically, I think we all know in hindsight, and they eventually did figure this out in the 1930s. Universal short rifle, way better idea.
Oh, yeah.
So keep going, though. What are the differences?
Yep, front sight. Now we have some nice little wing protectors up here, which I thought initially, I've had that happen before, where it's like the wings of a front sight can accidentally appear as the front sight itself, like the actual blade or whatever, barleycorn or whatever it might be. I was afraid it was going to appear as that, and I would accidentally try to line up on it. No, weirdly, it didn't ever at any point. It weirdly, if anything, feels like it helps me to align my sight faster.
Yeah, for me, these are very wide set. Like the sight protectors are rounded. Yeah, they're wide set,
and then they also come out at angles. Like it's pretty good.
And then the front sight blade is a blade.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to pick up from the other two.
It's not bad.
The only other feature that's kind of different on this is your handguard does come further down towards the receiver.
Which is nice, because these guns do get warm after some time. Right. So yeah, realistically, for just quick handling.
I believe we were having a discussion. I can't remember if it managed to get on camera last episode, but I said it's very hard to cycle a straight pull just holding it up in the air with nothing holding the butt.
I do. Maybe we did talk about it. I don't remember if we did or didn't.
I can't remember hit the cutting
if that was on camera or not.
But you noticed that the first thing I did was wrap my thumb all the way around. Well, if we had fired that gun, that chamber area would have been baking hot.
Oh, yeah.
And so what they've done is they've put a very thick, frankly thick wood handguard piece here that's very reinforced.
Substantial.
You can hold the gun right at the chamber area right after firing, which is honestly huge if you're used to shooting and moving.
Pretty fantastic. But aside from that, the only other massive thing comes with the recoil.
Yeah.
The massive differences between this and the others. So I thought the recoil was substantial on the G11 until after, like I mentioned before, as time went on, it started to get a little bit easier and feel more normal. This never felt really normal. It was always pretty substantial.
It is a bit of an overkill cartridge coming out of this.
And just a bit. So I'll probably show a comparison at some point of all three of them going together, and it's pretty up there. Like you had to adjust. I think I remember. Oh, I almost forgot when you were doing the shooting when we were actually shooting the gun at one point. You went, "We're gonna have to redo this because I had this wide angle of you too low because I was coming far out of frame." We
shot all long rifles and they were just sort of going up here, and then you shot the carbine, and on review I went, "Oh, we gotta reshoot it."
And that made you, as a result, feel a little. You were like, "I wonder if the other ones came out okay." And then I was like, "No, wait a minute, those recoils weren't quite that bad."
I don't think there's that dramatic of a difference of recoil between that. Short rifle. I keep saying carbine. In English, it's whatever, but they would say short rifle.
Yeah, it's...
Well, no, they say carabiner. But,
I guess it is a carabiner.
But it's the problem is we're getting mixed up in our heads because Switzerland had a carbine. They had a short rifle, and when they made this, they took the short rifle barrel length. So we keep wanting to call it a short rifle, but they call it the carbine. It is a carbine because they got rid of the short rifle, so there's no need to have that third category. So,
the weight's certainly there for carbine feel.
Yeah, I don't think there's any real big difference in recoil. Well, there is some big difference, but I don't think it's that dramatic between this and that. Don't get me wrong, this has a lot more weight and it helps with the recoil. I still think it likes to push itself up in a significant enough way that I don't feel like I'm losing anything drastically going into that shorter length.
I mean, that's fair. Realistically, the shorter length was already a massive plus. It's definitely preferred.
So I guess that brings us around to sort of the final question.
The final question.
Have I missed anything?
I don't think so.
Okay. What does this rank if in a theoretical Switzerland in the Great War? How would that stack up against some of the other guns you've shot? Is this getting in that top end area? This feels like it might be one of those high note guns.
Yeah, realistically, this is pretty high up there because it's a wonderful straight pull, very smooth, easy to operate from the shoulder. I've got 6 rounds. That's already great. It's better than average.
Chargers load easy.
Fantastic sights. Honestly, I think it's probably up there in the top 5, possibly even. Like,
so
it may have just jumped up there.
We're in the Serbian carbine range?
Yeah, it's getting pretty high up there because, I mean, can you think of another short rifle that we would be able to operate as rapidly as this one?
All my problems.
Carbine, sorry.
The only problems I have with this gun.
Okay.
Are inefficiencies in design that ultimately we see, and we're not doing this episode, but I'll give you a little bit of future speak. If you've ever seen the later 1930s K-31.
I love the K-31.
And what they did with the K-31 is they nested the bolt body into the unlocking mechanism. Because right now that bolt is twice as long as it needs to be.
Oh, yeah.
And
so just imagine this going here.
Right, so that's a mechanical inefficiency because essentially what they've done is they've built a bolt and then put the Vetterli bolt on the front of it, you know? And that's just how they had to do it from their understanding coming from the Vetterli. And then somebody finally went, well, wait a second, what if we just nest one inside the other, scooch everything back, get the magazine in? That gap between the trigger guard and the magazine drives me crazy.
I know, it is still really big,
but
guys.
these are logistical concerns. So as a nation, if I'm a nation adopting a rifle, I'm going to hesitate because this seems very expensive.
The nation of Othais?
I'd have to see the actual numbers. I'd have to see the skill required. I don't see wartime Italy producing this.
No, that's fair.
We've talked about this before. Italy did the Carcano. It was very handy, and it was within their means to produce. You know what I mean? Very simple gun, and it worked.
Oh, yeah, rugged.
We liked a lot of things about the Carcano more than most people.
Yeah.
This gun is extremely fancy, and it requires fancy work and metal and time. And it's not that it couldn't be produced for the war under a wartime nation, but boy, do I hesitate. It would just
cost a lot to do that.
Right. Can you imagine Italy trying to produce 1 million of these?
The time and the money that would go into it and the manpower, it just probably wouldn't make it.
Right. So as a nation, it
does make you hesitate.
I would love to give it to my troops, but could I? And then as an individual soldier, I would love to have this gun.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very nice gun. If you're an individual soldier, you're very much into this gun.
Although, again, the sight's 300, so, you know.
And then, by the way, this tells you something about something like Switzerland, where they went ahead and, despite their neutrality, dumped money and time and energy and research into having a good rifle and then put it on standby. They knew if everything went right, they'd never have to use it in anger. But
better to have it than not.
This is a damned good insurance policy.
Oh, yeah. It's fantastic.
Right.
I'd find this very reliable to have to pull out of the stockroom.
Right. So, I think that wraps us up, right? Happy?
Yeah. Happy. I'm happy.
And you own it, so you get to...
Yeah, I just got to put it back on the rack.
Are you sure you're not just biased because you already own these?
No, come on. Realistically, this is a whole new
She's
animal
trying to drive up the market before she sells it.
No, I'm not selling these. These are mine. I'm not selling my stuff.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed all of that. Don't forget on both of these sets of episodes, we had a lot of help from Bloke on the range. Check him out. He's a genuinely enjoyable person who haunts our Discord.
He does haunt our Discord.
Come and check on us. That's available at the bottom of the site. Otherwise, just have a good day, guys. Enjoy yourselves, enjoy your firearms, enjoy the show.
And the sunshine if you can.
Bye.
Night.
Alright gang, if you can't tell from the front of the episode, we're actually trying to drive up engagement a little bit, and we need your help with this. So, I know this is a cliche, but it does work, because if you do like and comment and share this episode, then more people get to see it. And it also helps YouTube to figure out where to place it in the algorithm, because right now I suspect that, maybe you're coming to this because you saw a Great War video, or maybe you're seeing this because you saw a Forgotten Weapons video, but I don't think we're getting shared a lot from people who come from other documentary series and things like that may enjoy this just as a history program all on its own. We've definitely seen sort of a even flatlining throughout most of 2020, and we would like to grow the show, because we're kind of at a nice little point where if we could just get a little bit higher in the funding, a little bit higher in the views, we may be able to leverage that to get some help in here and produce some new shows and actually release more content, which is something that I've been trying to do for quite a while now and would love your help on. Again, if you'd like to hear more about all this, we do have a behind the scenes podcast for our patrons and Subscribe Star people, so check out those platforms as well. Thank you and have a good one.